Story 1. The stranger at the hospital. The hospital was quiet at night. Almost too quiet. I worked as a janitor, and my shift always seemed to drag on. The endless white walls, the soft hum of fluorescent lights, and the distant beeps of machines made the place feel eerie once the sun went down. My only real escape was the basement office, a small, dimly lit room where I spent most of my nights when things were slow. It was right next to the morgue, a place I tried not to think about too much. It was around midnight, maybe a bit later, and I was sitting in the office with another janitor, Lewis. We were just passing the time with idle conversation and occasional glances at the clock, waiting for our shifts to end. The air was thick with the scent of disinfectant, the kind that clings to your clothes and fills your lungs. The only sound was the faint buzzing of the overhead light and the distant rumble of the air conditioning. Suddenly, I heard footsteps in the hallway. They were slow and deliberate, not the rushed steps of a doctor or nurse. The sound caught both of our attention, and we turned to look at the open doorway. A man was passing by, his eyes flicking toward us as he walked. There was something off about the way he looked at us, something shifty and unsettling. He didn't say anything, just kept walking, but I felt a strange chill creep up my spine. A few moments later, the man came back. This time, he stopped at the doorway and looked at us. He had a pale, almost sickly complexion, and his eyes were wide, like he hadn't slept in days. His clothes were neat but outdated, like something out of an old movie. He didn't seem like he belonged there, like he was out of place in the sterile, modern hospital. "Do you have access to the morgue?" he asked, his voice low and raspy. I exchanged a glance with Lewis. We both assumed he was doing a pickup for a funeral home. It wasn't entirely unusual, though the time of night made it strange. "Yes," I said cautiously, wondering what he was doing there so late. The man's expression didn't change, but there was a glint in his eyes that made me uneasy. I couldn't put my finger on it, but something about him just wasn't right. I expected him to mention a name or give some sort of explanation, but he didn't. Instead, he just stood there, staring at us with that unsettling look. Then he said something that made my heart skip a beat. "I'll pay you to let me in. Just for an hour. I need to be alone with the bodies." The words hung in the air like a bad smell, and a wave of nausea washed over me. Lewis and I exchanged another look, this one filled with disbelief and unease. The man didn't seem to notice our discomfort. His gaze was fixed, almost desperate, like he was waiting for us to say yes. I could feel the tension in the room, thick and suffocating. My mind raced as I tried to process what he was asking. Who would want to be alone in the morgue at this time of night? And why? "We can't do that," I said, my voice sounding more confident than I felt. "It's against hospital policy." The man's expression darkened, and for a moment, I thought he might argue or try to persuade us, but then he seemed to realize that we weren't going to budge. His eyes narrowed, and he clenched his jaw, the muscles in his face twitching slightly. He didn't say anything, just stared at us with a look that made my skin crawl. Finally, he turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing down the hallway. Lewis and I sat there in stunned silence, the gravity of what had just happened slowly sinking in. My heart was pounding, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we had narrowly avoided something terrible. "We should tell security," I said after a few moments. Lewis nodded, and we quickly made our way upstairs to the security office. The hospital felt even more ominous as we walked through the empty halls, the shadows seeming to stretch and grow in the dim light. When we reached the security office, we found the guard on duty and explained what had happened. As soon as we described the man, the guard's expression changed. He leaned forward, his eyes narrowing with recognition. "Did he say anything about wanting to be alone in the morgue?" the guard asked, his voice tense. "Yes," I replied, the unease in my stomach deepening. The guard let out a heavy sigh and shook his head. "He's tried this before. We've had a few run-ins with him over the past couple of months. He always disappears before we can catch him, but we know he's up to something. The man had done this before. What could he possibly want with the bodies in the morgue? My mind conjured up all sorts of disturbing possibilities, none of them comforting. The guard assured us that they would increase their patrols and keep an eye out for the man, but the whole experience left me shaken. As I made my way back to the basement office, I couldn't shake the feeling that we had come dangerously close to something dark and twisted. The hospital didn't feel safe anymore, not that it ever really had, but now it was different. Now it felt like a place where shadows hid secrets too terrible to imagine. For the rest of my shift, I couldn't stop thinking about the man, his pale face, his desperate eyes, the way he had asked to be left alone with the dead. It all played over and over in my mind like a broken record. Even after my shift ended and I went home, the unease lingered, like a shadow that refused to leave. I never saw the man again, but the memory of that night stayed with me. Every time I walked past the morgue, I felt that same chill, the one that reminded me of how close we had come to letting something monstrous slip through our fingers. Story 2. The Hunt Gone Wrong. In 2018, when I was 12 years old, my Uncle Sam took me hunting in the dense woods near our town. We had been there before, but this time it felt different. It was darker, and the trees seemed closer together, like they were trying to trap us. The air was heavy, filled with the smell of damp leaves and pine needles. It was so quiet that even the wind barely made a sound. We arrived just before sunset, setting up near the edge of the forest. Sam always said the best time to hunt was at night, when the animals were more active. I wasn't scared. I had been hunting with him before and trusted him. But as the sun dipped below the horizon and darkness swallowed the trees, I began to feel uneasy. The shadows stretched longer, turning the forest into a maze of dark shapes. We walked deeper into the woods, our boots crunching softly on the leaves. Sam had his rifle, and I carried a smaller one he had given me for my birthday. I held it close to my chest, feeling the cool metal against my palms. The deeper we went, the thicker the trees grew, blocking out the moonlight. Soon, the only light came from our flashlights. Now and then, we would stop, listening for any sign of movement. Sam was good at tracking animals, and he would often crouch down to inspect the ground. But that night, we didn't hear or see anything. No rustling leaves, no snapping twigs. It was like the forest had gone completely still. After an hour of walking, I started to feel tired. My legs ached, and I wanted to rest. Sam noticed and suggested we sit down for a bit. We found a small clearing and sat on a fallen log. The forest was so quiet that I could hear my heartbeat. Sam whispered something about waiting for the right moment, but I barely heard him. I was too focused on the darkness around us. Suddenly, there was a sound. It wasn't the usual rustling of leaves or the snapping of a twig. It was a low growl, deep and guttural, like something big was watching us. My heart sped up, and I looked at Sam. He was staring straight ahead, his face pale. He slowly reached for his rifle, motioning for me to do the same. The growl came again, this time closer. It echoed through the trees, making the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I gripped my rifle tighter, my hands shaking. Sam stood up slowly, his eyes scanning the trees. He didn't say a word, but I could see the fear in his eyes. Whatever was out there, it wasn't something we had ever encountered before. Then, from the shadows, a figure appeared. It was tall, much taller than any animal I had seen before. Its body was hunched over, and its eyes glowed faintly in the dark. It had the shape of a wolf, but much larger, almost like it didn't belong in this world. The growling grew louder, more aggressive. The creature's breath was visible in the cold night air, and I could see its sharp teeth glinting in the faint light of our flashlights. Sam whispered for me to stay still, but my legs felt like they were going to give out. I didn't move, frozen in place as the creature slowly stepped closer. Its growl turned into a snarl, its white eyes locked on us. Sam raised his rifle, aiming it at the creature, but he didn't shoot. It was like we both knew that shooting wouldn't help us. The creature circled us, moving through the shadows. Every time I thought it was gone, it would appear again, its glowing eyes watching us from the dark. I could barely breathe, my chest tight with fear. We were trapped, surrounded by darkness and this terrifying creature. The creature let out a loud, bone-chilling howl, so loud that it seemed to shake the trees around us. Sam grabbed my arm, pulling me to my feet. Without thinking, I ran. I could hear Sam running behind me, and the creature's growls echoed through the forest. The trees blurred as we sprinted through the underbrush, branches scratching at my arms and face. My lungs burned, and my legs felt like they were going to collapse. But I didn't stop. We ran deeper into the forest, not caring which direction we were going. All I knew was that I had to get away from that creature. But the more we ran, the more lost we became. The familiar trails had disappeared, and every direction looked the same, just endless dark trees and shadows. After what felt like hours, we stopped to catch our breath. My heart pounded in my chest, and my legs shook from exhaustion. Sam leaned against a tree, his face pale and sweaty. The growling had stopped, but the silence that followed was even more terrifying. "We need to keep moving," Sam said, his voice barely a whisper. But I didn't know where to go. We were lost, and that creature was still out there, watching us. We wandered through the forest for what seemed like hours, trying to find our way back. Every noise made me jump, and every shadow looked like the creature. My flashlight was starting to die, its beam growing weaker. The thought of being stuck in the forest in complete darkness terrified me. Just when I thought we would never find our way out, we stumbled upon a familiar path. It was narrow and overgrown, but I recognized it from earlier. Sam let out a sigh of relief, and we followed the path back to the truck. When we finally reached it, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I climbed into the passenger seat, my hands still shaking. Sam started the engine, and we drove away, the dark trees of the forest fading into the distance. We didn't speak on the ride home. The encounter with that creature was something neither of us could explain, and I didn't want to think about it anymore. But as I looked out the window, I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone in the forest that night. We made it out sun-harmed, but I knew one thing for sure. I would never go hunting in those woods again. Thanks for joining me on this journey into the night. If you enjoyed the hunt and want to see more adventures, don't forget to hit that like button. And if you want to stay updated on all our midnight mysteries, make sure to subscribe and ring that bell. Your support helps us uncover more secrets and bring you thrilling new content every week. Until next time, stay curious and keep hunting. This is The Midnight Hunt, signing off.